It's summer fire season. 7 million acres have burned, an area larger than the entire state of Vermont. Hospitals have opened special breathing centers so that children, elders, and people with respiratory illness can breathe. The sun is red through the smoky sky. Any way the wind blows, there's smoke from some wildfire. I live in California, and I'll bet you think I'm talking about this summer of 2020, but I'm not. I'm talking about Alaska in 2004, 16 years ago, at the edge of climate disruption. As part of the Human Fire Interactions Group, I was a researcher studying climate impacts on wildfire, and then the impacts of a changing wildfire pattern on subsistence livelihoods. Native Alaskans hunting moose and caribou, fishing for salmon and gathering berries. Living in the village of Galena along the Yukon River for 2 summers, there are no roads. So to get to all of my fire field sites, I traveled by float plane or boat, and safe travel was hampered by poor visibility due to smoke. So studying fire was extremely tough due to fire. This summer of fires made the national news in Alaska, alerting people to the dangers, with Alaskans asking us to wake up. I don't know that we really let the meaning sink in, though. Living in Galena, though, I saw it. There was a huge fire across the river, a huge tower of fire and smoke, and the fire crews were preparing fire lines in the village because they could not count on the river, a half-mile wide, stopping that fire. Rapid change begins at the poles, and I knew that the rest of the lower 48 and California would be seeing more and more impacts. Fast forward to California 2020. Wildfires, thousands of people displaced, they're climate refugees. Red sun through the smoke. Breathing rooms opened in cities. I will always remember Apocalypse Day, September 9th, when it looked like Mars, with orange skies that never quite made it to daylight. I'm sitting right now in the middle of burned forest. This fire started in mid-August 2020, the CZU lightning complex, with dry lightning fires. It burned about half of the county of Santa Cruz. In California, home to almost 40 million people, the 5th largest economy in the world, wildfires are providing another suite of emergency wake-up calls. People are paying more attention this time. People are also leaving California in droves, terrified that their homes will burn and that their lives are on the line. It turns out that 100 years of agency fire suppression creates a catastrophic combustible problem. The point is not to accrue waves and waves of wake-up calls, each one louder than the last, at emergency pitch. The point is to take action. When it's time to do something hard, we do it together. What is it that I want to do together? I work with Indigenous communities on prescribed and cultural fire, and I want to see it rolled out to an extent that it makes a difference for California and for climate solutions. This is possible with more of us on board and more respect for Indigenous ways. In the past year, I've worked with the tribe, the Amamutsun Tribal Band, on cultural and ecological restoration. Invited for my background in ecology and climate action, I work with the Native Stewardship Corps as the tribe relearns their traditional knowledge. What does it mean to do cultural ecological restoration in the field? In the case of fire suppression, there are too many thickets of trees, so we start cutting down trees and burning them in piles. That's one way to restore California coastal prairie, a perennial grassland. There was a much broader extent of California coastal prairie tended by Indigenous people with fire in the past and again right now in the present. Grasslands, as well as providing native foods and therefore food sovereignty, are heroes of carbon storage. Believe it or not, they can store as much carbon or more as forests, and potentially in a more stable way due to their deep root systems and the way they build carbon storage into soils. Having done this fuel removal, it's much safer to light fires on the ground that can travel at ground level and rarely climb the trees. With the Native Stewards, I became a certified firefighter in order to be a fire lighter. Having studied fire ecology for 20 years, the first time I ever lit fire, put good fire on the ground, was at a prescribed fire training exchange 1 year ago, hosted by the Karuk tribe on their land near the Klamath River in far northern California. That was a transformative experience. What does it look like to light a fire? We're gathered in a group and ready for the plan, the safety briefing, and from the Karuk people, the cultural message. There's an area to be burned, and the crew scratches line around the edge, scraping vegetation to mineral soil that we know will stop a fire. We're in formation of, for example, 3 people with the direction of the burn leader, walking the contours of the land back and forth, setting fire in lines. If that fire jumps to be out of control, it'll burn back into the already burned area, and that's another way of stopping it. So there's a pace, and we're walking the uneven ground. With a plan and all ground level fire, it's as gentle as fire can be. How could setting fires and sending carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere be a climate solution? This is a question of extent and kind of fire, that having consistent low intensity fire is much different and is a solution relative to catastrophic fires that burn whole towns, whole cities, whole forests. We will have fire in California. Even if we're afraid of it, we can't banish it. My colleague, Dr. Dawn Hankins, a Plains Miwok fire expert and academic, says, in a perfect world, if the landscape were still stewarded continuously with indigenous fire, we would definitely not see the level of fires we're seeing today. I agree with him. I'd like to tell you how I got here. My commitment to being a force for good is to train, and to train as a scholar. I earned my Bachelor and Master's of Science degrees in Earth Systems at Stanford University, going on to work in ecology for 4 years at an ocean research station. I then completed my PhD at the University of California, Santa Cruz in environmental studies, starting with the Human-Fire Interactions Project in Alaska. I've continued to do science to action work. Stewardship is a central theme for me. Stewardship is also central for the indigenous communities I've worked with. I've seen mainstream scientists be dismissive and short-sighted, not taking the time to understand indigenous science, first as science, and looking down their noses, assuming that communities don't know one end from the other. With that said, I've also seen researchers be equitable and respectful collaborators. They pay deep attention. I'm not living in a binary where all the scientists are white and don't come from communities, or all the communities are Black, brown, and indigenous and don't have scientists and scholars. At the same time, I've seen rifts between academic research culture and community culture. The people that are reimagining science that I'm already part of show cultural humility and collaborate, asking, what are your priorities as a community? What are the challenges you're facing? There is good evidence that communities themselves have better and more effective climate solutions than outsiders coming in as experts. That doesn't surprise me. For example, when indigenous fire practitioners are using fire as a sacred tool, they're drawing on 10,000 years of tending since time immemorial. However, there's a violent 250-year interruption in California with 3 waves of colonization. Native people were murdered through displacement, war, disease, the mission system, and specifically for lighting fires as a form of land care. Indigenous fire has been outlawed and criminalized through 3 waves of colonization: the Spanish, the Mexican, and the American period. This means that there are settlers who don't have a deep relationship with the land and with fire as a sacred tool, interrupting those who do. That's part of the deep problem of where we are today. In addition, the US government legalized genocide. It's not that if people had only stayed within the rules, even those imposed on them, they would have been okay. There were bounties set on Native people's heads. In 1853, the US government created treasury bonds to pay bounties from 50 cents to $5 a scalp for the deaths of Native people. This violent interruption means that some tribes are relearning what was lost to them, while others are continuing long-standing lineage. Following indigenous burning means following their ecological timing and cues, preparation and burning, as well as ceremony, and whether outsiders are invited to that ceremony or not. It means looking at multiple beneficial impacts of fire, one of which is the smoke. The smoke can decrease pathogens and pests in acorns high in the oak trees, making a better crop for animals and people. It will take a lot of integration to align ceremony and sophisticated tending with agency practice and regulation. I've seen the collaboration happen with State Parks field crew that I work with here. Having been invited, they join the native stewards each morning for smudging and gratitude in circle. I see them more connected to the land through ceremony. Where else do these collaborations happen? With greater equity and parity, I see the exchanges happening in prescribed fire training exchanges across the US and internationally. I see county level and community efforts to create fire resilience practice, fire safety councils, and become more familiar with fire. And I see tribes, again in this example in far northern California, like the Kuruk, the Yurok, and the Hupa tribes, building their own fire departments and leading cultural fire, intergenerational fire practice. What do I want you to do? I want you to build momentum and power behind Indigenous land stewardship and fire. I want you to learn more of the history of the land you're on in your watershed. I want you to learn truth in history, which means reading multiple sources and listening to multiple groups about what's happened here. Good fire needs to be allowed, needs to be insurable for the fire practitioners setting fire, and needs to be held in multiple knowledge systems with Indigenous practitioners leading the way. I'm giving a land acknowledgement at the end, even though it's usually done at the beginning. I'm standing here on the land of the Quiroste people who were killed by colonizers. That doesn't mean that there aren't Native people who are here, who are tending land, who are in relationship. To the north are the Ramaytush Ohlone people. To the northeast, the Muwekma, the Confederated Villages of Lashon, the Miwok, and Chochenyo-speaking people. To the east, the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band. To the south, the Ama Mutsun Tribal Band, and further south, the Rumsian Ohlone and Salinan people. I pledge to get behind their land care. I pledge when invited to contribute my science, training, my muscle, and my sweat to their work. Thank you.